Welcome back, grade 11 learners. Welcome to your reading and writing skills subject. And this time, we are going to talk about patterns of development in writing across disciplines. But beforehand, let me tell you about our content standard. You learners are going to realize that information in a written text may be selected and organized to achieve a particular purpose. And for your learning competency, you're going to distinguish between and among patterns of development in writing across disciplines. But this time, you are going to learn 8 patterns of development. We have narration, definition, comparison and contrast, problem solution, description, exemplification, classification, cause and effect, and of course, persuasion. Alright, so start with, whenever we write, we are trying to convey a particular message on how we're going to convey the message that we are trying to point out or that we are trying to deliver to our target audience or to our target readers. Okay, now here comes patterns of development, which helps us sort out information and shape paragraphs or essays. They can help organize an outline, or depending on the purpose, they can determine the form that a paper will take. Meaning to say, these patterns of development will serve as our springboard, will serve as our blueprint in order for us to deliver the message that we would like to convey. In other words, patterns of development helps you to organize and develop your ideas and content in your essays or in any written article of yours. Moreover, these patterns of development include a range of logical ways to organize an entire text. So that is your magic word, that is your key term there, organize your entire text or your whole article. Meaning to say, these patterns of development are your strategies, are your styles on how you write, your concepts, your thoughts and ideas in order for you to be fully comprehended or understood by your readers. Now let's talk about the first type of pattern of development. We have narration. Narration is simply telling a story or recounting a series of events. Alright? It's when you watch a particular movie and then you would like to tell it to your friends or to your family. It's based on personal experience or on knowledge gained from reading or from observation. Just like what I've told you earlier. Chronology, or the sequence of events, or the order of how things happen, usually governs narration, which includes concrete detail, a point of view, and sometimes such elements as dialogue. You narrate, you tell a story. The most essential parts of this pattern are the main idea, the major dates and events, such as the final outcome, major steps, stages, and the order of presentation. Okay, like first, second, third, what happens next. So here are some signal words to help you whether a particular text is written using a pattern of development called narration. So we have here about, as soon as, before, finally, in the meantime, next, second, after, at this point, or at that point, during, first, later, next week, soon, afterwards, presently, eventually, immediately, meanwhile, prior to. Alright, so you better remember those signal words. Now, let's have some sample text. Let's try to determine why this particular text is an example of a narration. Ondoy began to develop from an active low-pressure area to a tropical cyclone on September 24, 2009. The following day, Pag-asa raised storm signals all over the Philippine archipelago. At that point, signal number 2 was raised in Catanduanes and other parts of Luzon. By Saturday morning, reports of flooding started to pour in. Meanwhile, President Arroyo declared a state of calamity in Metro Manila. Immediately after President Arroyo's declaration, various government agencies began the rescue and relief operations. As soon as Typhoon Ondoy exited the Philippines, more and more relief and rescue operations were conducted. So if you can see, there are lots of signal words that were used in the sample text. Okay, we have begun, the following day, at that point, by, meanwhile, immediately, and as soon as. So these are your clues. And of course, basically, this is an example of a narration pattern of development because it narrates or it shares a particular story in an order, in a chronological sequence. which tells which comes first, next, and so on and so forth, and the things that had happened on that particular account. Next type of pattern of development, we have definition. Definition as a type of pattern of development may lay the foundation to establish common ground or identify areas of conflict. For example, before we can determine whether certain behavior is or is not patriotic, we must define the term first. Okay, definition can only be a paragraph or two that clarify terms, but in other cases, the purpose of an entire essay is to establish a definition. When do we use definition? Sometimes we use this in explaining unfamiliar terms. And definition has two major purposes. First, to explain. Second one is to convince. Here is a sample text which uses definition as a pattern of development. Let's read this. The trouble is, though, that if, for any reason, the body has more cholesterol than it needs, there is a tendency to get rid of it by storing it on the inner surface of the blood vessels, especially the coronary vessels that feed the heart. This is atherosclerosis. That is a text titled Cholesterol by Isaac Asimov. Plainly, the text defines what atherosclerosis is, the main topic of that particular text. It uses the pattern of development definition in order to relay what that particular topic or what that particular term is to the audience. Right, so here is another. Good families prize the rituals. Nothing wilds a family more than this. Rituals are vital, especially for clans without histories, because they evoke a past, imply a future, and hint at continuity. No line in the setter's service at Passover reassures more than the last. Next year in Jerusalem, a clan becomes more of a clan each time it gathers to observe a fixed ritual. Christmas, birthdays, Thanksgiving, and so on. Groups at a funeral. Anyone may come to most funerals, those who do declare their tribalness, and devises a new rite of its own. Equinox breakfasts can be at least as welding as Memorial Day parades. Several of my colleagues and I used to meet for lunch every Pearl Harbor Day, preferably to eat some politically neutral fare like smorgasbord to forgive our only ancestrally Japanese friend, Irene Kubota Neves. For that and other things, we became and remain a sort of family. You see how the main topic was elaborated using definition as a type of pattern of development. Here are some signal words that may help you when you try to use definition as a pattern of development. Okay, we have is defined as defined, means, refers to define, or to illustrate. Social engineering is defined as, so that's the signal word, any method which tricks people to share personal information through the use of technology. Obviously, the topic is all about social engineering, and it's trying to let it be understood by the audience using the pattern of development definition. The social component in this scheme means, another signal word, that there is reliance on various psychological tricks and on the gullibility of users rather than technical hacking. Social engineering also refers to various malicious acts online, such as phishing, spamming, and pretexting. You see how the author had used different signal words in this type of pattern of development. Next, we have description. It's very actually easy to understand. When we talk about description as a pattern of development, it is closely allied with narration because both include many specific details, if you can still remember. However, the difference is, unlike narration, description emphasizes the senses. Okay, in other words, it appeals majorly or dominantly to our senses by painting a picture of how something looks, sounds, smells, tastes, or feels. So basically, these are your five senses. And whenever you write a particular text using description as a pattern of development, make sure that you are trying to appeal to these senses. Description is often used to establish a mood or atmosphere. It sets the tone, it sets the mood and the atmosphere of the text when you are using description as a pattern of development. Rarely is an entire essay descriptive, but clear and vivid description can make writing more persuasive. In other words, the text becomes more interesting to be read because it appeals to all of the senses. Actually, by asking your audience to see what you see and feel what you feel, you make it easy for them to empathize with you. They can relate with you, your subject, or your argument. Here is a sample text of description. When I pulled the trigger, I did not hear the bang or feel the kick. You see that? That appealed to the sense of hearing the bang. One never does when a shot goes home. But I heard the devilish roar of glee that went up from the crowd. In that instant, in too short a time, one would have thought, even for the bullet to get there, a mysterious, terrible change had come over the elephant. Continue. He neither steered nor fell, but every line of his body had altered. You can imagine that already. He looked suddenly stricken, shrunken, immensely old, as though the frightful impact of the bullet had paralyzed him without knocking him down. At last, after what seemed a long time, it might have been 5 seconds, I dare say, he sagged floppily to his knees, his mouth slobbery. Use your imagination. An enormous senility seemed to have settled upon him. One could have imagined him thousands of years old. I fired again into the same spot. At a second shot, he did not collapse, but climbed with desperate slowness to his feet and stood weakly upright, with legs sagging and head drooping. I fired the third time. That was the shot did for him. You could see the agony of it jolt his whole body and knock the last remnant of strength from his legs. But in falling, he seemed for a moment to rise, for as his hind legs collapsed beneath him, he seemed to tower upward like a huge rock, toppling his trunk, reaching skyward like a tree. He trumpeted for the first and only time, and then down he came, his belly towards me, with a crush that seemed to shake the ground even where I lay. You see how this particular text uses all the types of senses to appeal to its reader. It's full of descriptive words that allow the readers to imagine what is happening on the story, which makes it more enticing or more interesting to be read or to be heard, at least by the audience. Again, that's description. Now let's proceed to exemplification or classification. Exemplification/classification is providing a series of examples. That's why it's called exemplify, to give examples. Facts, the specific cases or instances. Turns a general idea into a concrete one. This makes your argument both clearer and more persuasive to a reader. A writer might use one extended example or a series of related ones to illustrate a point. In other words, when you're using exemplification as a pattern of development, you are using more than one example. So you are providing a lot of examples to state your main point or to illustrate your main thought, or simply a series of specific examples that lead you to a particular or to a general conclusion. Classification means to sort items in order to group together those with similar characteristics and to distinguish them from those with different characteristics. So here is an example. Although traditionally pizza is an Italian dish, Greek pizza, Mexican pizza, and Hawaii are becoming increasingly popular. Okay, you see several examples were given to illustrate the main point of the author. So that's exemplification/classification. Now let's proceed to comparison and contrast. This is no longer new to you, but we have to discuss this here. Comparison and contrast is juxtaposing two things to highlight their similarities and differences. Okay, you are trying to compare and contrast two things. Comparison means to identify the ways in which two different items are similar. And contrast means to identify the ways in which two similar items are different. Okay? Take note of that. Writers use comparison and contrast to analyze information carefully, which often reveals insights into the nature of the information being analyzed. Whether as a full essay or a paragraph, it can be organized in two ways. a subject-by-subject comparison and contrast, or a point-by-point. So what's the difference between the two? In a subject-by-subject analysis, the writer discusses all elements of one subject, then turns to another. For instance, a comparison and contrast of two presidential candidates by subject would present a full discussion of the first candidate, then the second candidate. While a point-by-point analysis is so organized around the specific points of a discussion. So a point-by-point analysis of two presidential candidates again might discuss their education, then their experience, then the vision each has for the country. Okay, every single detail. That's why it's called point by point. Get that? Okay. Now let's proceed to cause and effect. Cause and effect, just like comparison and contrast, is no longer new to you. Cause and effect is analyzing the causes that lead to a certain effect, or conversely, the effects that result from a cause is a powerful foundation for the argument. Since causal analysis depends upon crystal clear logic, it is important to carefully trace a chain of cause and effect and to recognize possible contributing causes. You don't want to jump to conclusion as fast as that. So you have to determine what is the reason behind this. Okay. You don't want to jump to the conclusion that there is only one cause or one result. That's why it says there, it is a chain of cause and effect. Nor do you want to mistake an effect for an underlying cause. So to say, cause and effect is finding the reasons that produce a certain result or to identify the results produced by a certain phenomenon. There are some sample topics which you can use cause and effect as a pattern of development. The effects of acid rain on vegetation. Here's another. Italian food in Italy is very different from American Italian food because of regional variations and because of availability of ingredients. Now let's proceed to problem and solution. Problem solution, it's very easy to identify. It divides information into two sections, obviously the problem and the solution. It's designed to compel the reader to make some kind of change in opinion or behavior regarding a particular topic, a particular issue, a particular concern, a particular advocacy, or a particular point. Okay, in the problem, the writer identifies the different aspects of the problem, of course, and offers evidence of these problems. In the solution section, the writer identifies a potential solution and support effectiveness of this solution. Okay, very self-explanatory. Example, the problem is motorized transportation. So here are some of the major concerns or primary concerns. First, increasing traffic congestion. Second, increasing pollution. Third, increasing road rage from traffic-related stress. So here are the solutions. Okay? First, bike riding reduces number of vehicles. 2, bike riding is not a source of pollution. Number 3, bike riding has physical and psychological benefits. As you can notice, all the problems mentioned on the problem section are being addressed on the solution part. Okay, so that's how it goes. Okay, increasing traffic congestion is a problem. The solution, you have to ride bike because it reduces the number of vehicles. Right? On second problem, it increases pollution. Now, you have to ride bike also because that is not a source of pollution. It does not emit any form of gas. The third problem is increasing road rage from traffic-related stress. Number 3, bike riding has physical and psychological benefits. So you have a better mental state when you are riding a bicycle on a regular basis, of course. And of course, if you go back to the definition of problem and solution earlier, it must be provided by evidence. So you can state data, statistical data, evidence that would support your claim. For example, you may cite, according to Department of Science and Technology, in the year 2020, more vehicles produce 75% of carbon dioxide, etc., and so on and so forth. And lastly, we have persuasion. Persuasion is simply asking yourself, how can I convince you? Or how are you going to convince the readers or your audience? It is the process of making someone to believe, that's a magical term, on something or do something by convincing him that it is the logical and reasonable thing to do. It's just like selling a particular product and you have to convince or you have to persuade your consumer that that is the best product for that particular concern. Critics or reviews, reaction papers, editorials, proposals, advertisements, and brochures Make strong use of persuasive paragraphs to state opinions and to influence others. So that's where you can read samples of texts that use pattern of development, which is persuasion. Persuasion allows you to express your personal conviction or opinion about an issue or topic and make the readers agree with you or adopt your opinion. Okay, in other words, you're trying to get them onto your side and make them believe that what you're trying to fight for, to stand for, is the right thing to do. And then later on, eventually, after reading your text, they will be on your side supporting your claim. But how are you going to do that? Of course, you have to use some techniques. First, you have to use evidence, cite concrete, relevant, and valid evidences, and then give examples that would support your claim. And of course, you have to attack opposing views. You have to present the pros, the advantages, and then the cons or the disadvantages, the positive side, and then the negative side. That's how you do persuasion as a form of pattern of development. So, from among these patterns of development in writing across disciplines being discussed, what do you think is your most favorite? Anyway, before I forget to tell, actually sometimes or in other cases, we are not only using one type of pattern of development when we are writing. We are using different combinations depending on our purpose as a writer. Alright, there you have it once more, the 8 patterns of development, which are not limited unto this. In other references or in other resources, there are still lots of patterns of development. But this time, let's leave it that way. Goodbye and thank you for listening.